Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. I'm Jim Lively with the Groundwork Center. This podcast is also brought to you by the Michigan Climate Action Network. Today we have a very special episode. We're going to hear from U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib from Detroit, as well as U.S. Senators Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow. Right now there's so much happening in our nation's capital around climate change, and we have a huge opportunity with a slim pro-climate majority to actually move forward policy and major investments in clean energy. So the three of Michigan's members of Congress were speakers at the Michigan Climate and Clean Energy Summit on May 25th and 26th. That was a 4-day digital summit that Groundwork organized with MyCan. First, you're going to hear from Congresswoman Tlaib, and you'll hear questions from Charlotte Jameson, who's our partner at the Michigan Environmental Council, who moderated the session. Then you will hear from Senators Peters and then Senator Stabenow, who I had the pleasure of talking with on their panel. We will talk about what climate solutions we can expect from Congress, what the Biden administration is doing on climate and justice, their views on Line 5, how we can actually move forward what is needed, and more. It is 3 fascinating conversations that you don't want to miss.
Thank you so much, Jim, and MyCan and all the other sponsors and hosts of this summit. It's been truly inspirational and really great to be involved. And I'm so excited to be your cruise director for today's really great panel. First off, as Jim said, we've got the amazing U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib from Detroit. Rashida represents the 13th congressional district, which covers parts of Detroit, some western metro Detroit communities, as well as downriver. And Representative Tlaib has been a huge champion for environmental justice and climate. And so it's great to have her here tonight. She also is a former representative in the Michigan State House. So she comes with a really unique perspective on both the state level and the federal level. And with that, I would love to hand it over to the U.S. Congresswoman to take it away.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Good evening. As you all know, I have been an organizer around the right to breathe clean air and our fight for clean water. And so it is incredibly important that you all continue to give credibility to what I'm trying to say. Now with the title of Congress, some people are not listening as much as they should, but I know you all bring the residents and again, the credibility to what I'm trying to, again, pass through Congress. You all know after decades of inaction and indifference, Washington now is finally seems to be waking up to the urgency of the climate crisis and taking decisive action to protect our communities and our planet. This didn't happen because of a political party, y'all, or that someone had a profound change of heart. It truly happened because of the sustained pressure and the grassroots organizing of many of you activists that really have put the human face that I think is needed to urge President Biden and members of Congress to act. First of all, it really truly helps to have a president who is receptive to the activist pressure on climate change. I've heard Working Families Party always says it as a way of, President Biden is not the destination, he is the door to the possibility of better. And so it is incredibly important as we watch the Biden administration make different decisions that for me are very much welcomed and a complete surprise in many ways of the bold, aggressive next steps in trying to reduce fossil fuel emissions. So luckily we have some real climate champions in Congress, as you know, beyond just myself, who grew up in Southwest Detroit, knowing that smell wasn't normal as I got older and knowing that much truck traffic and living in the shadows of a polluting industry like Marathon, US Steel, and so many, that wasn't normal. And watching my loved ones, my neighbors get sick, and again, people saying it's in the name of job creation, when we know that jobs can't fix cancer, nor can they give us better public health, as you all know. So I'm really pleased to be working with Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Senator Sanders, Markey, all have led the way around the vision that the Green New Deal produces and in all of its forms. The Green New Deal has been powerful an organizing tool for grassroots, and despite right-wing attempts, I think, in spreading lies about what it means, I mean, if you read it, it is a set of principles and a vision and goals that are really, truly widely adopted throughout our communities and understanding this is our moment. Namely, I want to all highlight the Thrive Act. It was introduced by Representative Debbie Dingell, who I know is extremely important to this movement in getting folks on board and trying to move legislation like this. And it's a large part of the Congressional Progressive Caucus work in the past of really trying to reverse decades of inaction with a transformational bill like this. It's 10 years, $10 trillion investment in our communities. We've been told, as you all know, over and over again, that we have to choose between our environment and the economy, between good paying jobs and breathing clean air. But I really, truly believe we must reject that false choice. The Thrive Act will create more than 15 million green union family sustaining jobs, with 260,000 jobs created just in Michigan the first year of the program. We talk about making the 13 districts strong, my district. Every time I talk about it, I say we birth movements. And I truly believe my district can help become the engine of the Green New Deal. And so this bill, the Thrive Act, is the economy-wide transformation that we all have been really envisioning as we talk about so many different levels of how to combat climate crisis. And it includes investments in clean water, which is really important right now in our communities, affordable public transit, and a green energy grid. It expands access to green energy, electric vehicles, y'all, and then also healthy buildings. It also protects our wetlands, our forests, and sustainable agriculture. And critically, the Thrive Act makes those investments to address historic discrimination and pollution by prioritizing frontline communities like mine, the one I grew up with, and also our Indigenous communities that have always been the sites of our worst injustices. So too often, again, our frontline communities are given the choice between a job and their well-being. And the Thrive Act doesn't make anyone make that choice. And so this act will be union jobs with wage and benefit protections. There will be community benefits agreements, which is something I have worked on closely, not only in the legislature, but also as an organizer in my neighborhood, and really trying to have equitable hiring and contracting practices. There will also be environmental justice standards to protect our neighborhoods. Really, again, where we live, where we are raising our children, we all should be protected from these injustices. Our people have waited long enough for their chance to thrive. I think, one of the things I told President Biden, one of the first things I told President Biden is I think we want the same thing, but I'm on a different timeline. And of course, he kind of looked at me and I said, well, sir, I can't, my folks can't wait any longer. We've waited years, and we can't afford another hour, not even another week or another month to act on climate. And again, it's our frontline communities that have been directly impacted by it. So I am going to move with a sense of urgency. And so it might not make me the most favorite member of the United States Congress, but this is what my residents have asked me to do. And so we must pass the Thrive Act this year and get to work. We are fortunate that there are really are too many other good climate bills to name. There's tons of them out there. Please pay attention to the End Polluter Welfare Act, which will abolish fossil fuel subsidies and research support. That's a really important bill that we've had a couple hearings in the House Oversight Committee on. We also have the Civilian Climate Corps, which will put millions, this is a really exciting one, millions to people to work reducing carbon emissions, enabling a transition to renewable energy and building healthier and more resilient communities. We also have the Environmental Justice for All bill, which is something being led by one of my chair members of a committee on natural resources. And it basically puts these environmental principles in federal decision-making processes and introduces one of the most important things that I've heard many residents after Flint and after what's been continuing to happen in the 48217 zip code in my district is we need a cumulative impact analysis in the permitting process. So this environmental justice for all bill would include that. And really lastly, and this is also important, is the Respond Act. Representative Cleaver and I had introduced this. It would advance climate safe retirement plan options. You should know people that work in the EPA do not want their retirement funds invested in what they're trying to combat. And so I want to give them that option, and the Respond Act does that. And I think we have to continue to put the pressure on regarding Line 5. I know many of us here today have been working to shut down Line 5, and I wanted to update folks really quickly that we are fortunate to have Governor Whitmer's partnership in taking bold stands, and it hasn't been easy for her and her administration in fighting against the Enbridge's, misleading, the gaslighting, the lies and obstruction. I want you all to know that I have her back in Washington and continue to speak the truth about what is happening, and also working with my Minnesotan, colleagues who are also fighting to shut down Line 3 in Minnesota. We have sent a letter to President Biden together urging him to direct the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct what we call environmental impact statements, really important, aggressive approach to ensuring that our environment and our health is protected. And then you should also know that I continue to work really extremely hard with the administrator of PHMSA. The Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration had a really great meeting with them to raise concerns about Enbridge's continued lies and misrepresentation as if they're an instrument of the federal government. They are not. And we helped PHMSA understand that Enbridge is a repeat offender that cannot be trusted. And PHMSA is currently weighing in options on how they can intervene. But with that, again, know that my door is always open. I truly believe the way I can be effective and your true partner is to be an extension of the work that you all do. I know many of us are smaller nonprofit organizations or organizers within our own neighborhoods and communities. Don't hesitate to use my office as a place to get research done, to answer some of your questions, to understand maybe what are best strategies or what other states are doing in regards to these issues. I'm here to help because, again, many of you are giving credibility to the work I'm trying to do in DC. And as someone, again, that grew up in Southwest Detroit, really thinking that, nothing could be done in regards to pushing back against billions of dollars being invested in polluting our air and our water. Now I understand years later that it's people power movements like ours that really can make the difference. And people are listening to you in Washington, DC. And I'm so happy that we're now finally having an administration that is creating that door to the possibility of better. Thank you all so much. And I'm really pleased to be with all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Tlaib. I think we maybe have time for one or two quick questions. One, just inspiring, and I wanted to thank you for all of your leadership on these critical bills. One of the things that we saw sort of the Biden administration and the president himself, unveil right out the gate around climate and healthy people and healthy communities was a big infrastructure investment bill. And since then, we've sort of seen some pushback on the Senate side in particular. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about where that stands and what do you think, if you pulled out your crystal ball of those kind of climate funding proposals stands the best chance of getting through?
I think I want all of the advocates and all of you to understand, you have the House and you have the presidency, or the White House. So you have at least two branches that have got your back in regards to being aggressive and bold. We all need your help in getting the Senate on board. We fought extremely hard, and many of us are nonpartisan, but we all know that much of the organizing work in Georgia was around racial injustice, around combating climate, around the do nothing approach on how to address poverty in our healthcare system. And so it is so important that we all demand accountability for the Senate. I'm pushing hard to get rid of the filibuster because I think that is going to be continued a barrier, not only in pushing back against voter suppression laws across our country, which is going to impact climate work, but it also continues again to be a barrier on this particular issue. We now have a president that's listening, and we have a House members of Congress that are being bold and very, very aggressive in regards to this issue. but now we still have a Senate that some of the members are, the handful are being obstructionist in regards to pushing back on us moving forward. Again, we've already wasted enough time, and I continue to say this to my colleagues, we've waited over a decade, just even remotely getting close to what we have now in the proposal. So please don't give up. And we do have 2 senators that are on our side, but this is senators we need to get aggressive. I am not afraid, as everyone knows, to call out and hold those accountable, because I'm not going to let anyone get in the way of me representing my residents in the most effective way. And if you're not in agreement, then I need to make sure people know that you're the one blocking it, that you're the one that is preventing us from having clean air and clean water. I always explain to people the human toll that we have taken, that many of our families have experienced, and really doing nothing. And so I just hope that we all work together and not giving up, and saying that the Senate has to hear us the same way the president and the House of Representatives has.
Thanks. Yeah, it seems like, from your perspective, the best way that people who are excited and want to take action is really to connect with you and to do organizing and to reach out to our U.S. senators and get involved that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, I think a lot of the work in regarding processes, because you're going to hear people talk about abolishing the filibuster, I think we need to, as an environmental justice community, talk about what our role is, because it is going to continue, I think, becoming a barrier in us getting some of the work done, especially around pushing back against fossil fuel investment, which the president is willing to do, completely halt, stop any subsidies going to fossil fuel industry. That is huge, y'all. That would make a huge difference in Wayne County. For me, we haven't met sulfur dioxide standard or Clean Air Act standards in over 15 years alone in Wayne County, Michigan, which is the most populated county in the state of Michigan. And so again, we have waited far too long to get, again, a White House that's listening and engaging us and coming up with proposals that it should be something that all of us get behind. And so I do ask you to engage us, of course, but also don't just talk to us, the choir, talk to the folks in the Senate that, again, continue to push back, because this is a once in a lifetime. I truly believe this is our moment. I continue to say that to people, and we cannot hold it back. Some folks are saying maybe no, if we don't push now, I'm really worried we won't ever have this opportunity again.
Yeah, it feels like we at least have a 2-year window to get some action done, and we really have to seize on that. I'm curious too, I know you've had experience in the Michigan State House and now on the federal level, and we're going to hear from some state legislators in a little bit, but I just wonder, from your perspective, having experience in both of those places, what are ways that we can sort of both utilize state power and also, combine that with work that's being done on the federal level to really move this issue forward holistically?
Yeah, Charlotte, I think a lot of our Michiganders want accountability, but they really want transparency too. And one of the things that I wish we could do more here in the state of Michigan, because we can do more than what the federal government requires us to do, that's delegated from the EPA on the federal level, is injecting public health into the discussions of air permits, water quality, and so much more. If we did that, you would see a sense of putting people first before there's a discussion about job creation, economy, and so forth, is making sure that folks is, again, public health, their communities, neighbors, all connected. People don't understand the property values are connected. The local communities there connected. That local economy is as important, right? And so I think it's so important as we think about the way we permit, the way we engage, that we are, pushing and saying we need a cumulative impact analysis at the state level. We can do that. We can require different kinds of enforcement that pushes back against those that continue to violate their own air permits. They're coming to us and saying this is how much they're going to pollute, and they pollute above it, and they're just slapped on the hand, given 21 days to adjust it. That is not real accountability. And so on the state level, I think it's really important to change that culture. We're already doing that even on the on economic justice issues, you see local city council members and others pushing and saying we need minimum wage, right? They already know what's at stake, and they saw that. We can do that here at the local level and really organizing and bringing, again, credibility to the work that we're trying to do on the national level.
I think I'll ask one more question that I know you have to get on your way, but we saw Biden administration embrace the Justice 40 initiative. I know you've talked about now the integrating public health into state decision making. I'm wondering if you have other ideas or thoughts on how we can make sure that the policies that we're supporting in the climate space really do benefit the communities that have been most impacted.
Yeah, Charlotte, a lot of the corporate polluters are in violation. They pay fines. They're told, oh, that's bad, don't do it again. And then everybody crossed their fingers and hopes that that actually happens. And just as somebody, again, that grew up in the shadows of all these industries that continue to do the same thing over and over again, we need to make sure our frontline communities are at the table. And what I mean is, don't just study us, please. We've already been studied enough. We've had so many meetings. I can't express to you how many air permit meetings I had just as a freshman member of the Michigan legislature. And it's just constant rubber stamping. I think one of my residents said to me, she was a senior citizen in 48217 neighborhood. She said, Rashida, I just feel like we just give people permission to pollute. It's like they're just giving them permission to kill us. And she said it like that. She just said permission to pollute, permission to kill us. And so there obviously is this sense that residents feel completely just left behind in regards to how their government is supposed to be about them. It's supposed to be about people, and how we can change that. Because it seems like who gets access the most are the corporate billionaires. It's the corporate polluters. It's the corporations. It's their lobbyists. Our residents at home, this is it. We are it for them, y'all. We, the community, nonprofit, grassroots organizations. And so, Charlotte, to answer your question, we have to figure out a way where their voices are centered in all of the work that we're doing. I don't know how many times I've said, why isn't the public health department engaged on this air permitting? It's near a school. So what's the impact on children from K through 6th grade? What are we doing in regards to that? And again, that's what I think a lot of corporations don't want to happen, is to actually understand what the impact is on our bodies and on our communities. And so somehow we need to change the way we do this. It shouldn't just be this checklist that the federal government gives us. It should be something that says, what is the best thing for our state and Michiganders? And what clearly, I don't care if it's fracking up north, to Line 5, to air permitting, or to the water issue in Flint. What is consistent is that residents do not feel like they truly have an advocate in our state, and we have to change that to really truly be much more effective, I think, in getting legislation done. Because the more you engage them and understand that this is about them, the more you might see many of the legislative members moving on this issue.
That's great. Well, thank you so much again, Representative Tlaib, for being here and for all of your amazing work and championing environmental justice and climate in the U.S. Congress. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you all so much.
So now, this afternoon, we have the good fortune to hear more about federal opportunities from the congressional perspective. In a moment, I will facilitate a conversation centered on clean energy and climate with Michigan's two esteemed U.S. Senators, Senator Gary Peters and Senator Debbie Stabenow. Please remember to remain on mute during this discussion and feel free to utilize the chat. And also remember to stick around after comments from our senators for our networking happy hour, which will be made possible by one of our Great Lakes Business Network's founding members, Cherry Republic. So it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Senator Gary Peters. Senator Peters has represented the state of Michigan in the U.S. Senate since 2015. He was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2008 after serving in the Michigan State Senate for 2 terms and previously as a Rochester Hills City Councilman and in the U.S. Navy Reserve. I first met Senator Peters several years ago on Mackinac Island, where I first learned of his shared concern about the Line 5 pipeline, and we've since appreciated his strong leadership on that important issue. Currently, Senator Peters serves as chairman of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, as well as on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee and the Armed Services Committee. We are very honored to have him joining us today. Welcome, Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for the warm welcome and introduction, and to everybody tuning in today. Thank you for all of your work. I know everybody on this call today are activists who care deeply about our state and care deeply about our planet and understand the urgency of dealing with climate change. And I look forward to having an opportunity to talk a little bit about the actions that we're taking here at the federal level. But understand that in order for us to deal with this existential threat, that we all have to come together at all levels of government, and we need activists all throughout our communities, making sure the focus remains on the need for us to act. And I don't need to tell anybody on this call that the need to act is now. Actually, it was yesterday, but we're past yesterday, so we have to act now. Time is not on our side. We have to be aggressive. I am pleased that we are seeing tremendous leadership out of the Biden administration, understanding the importance of this. We remember the last administration that took actions like pulling us out of the Paris Accords and basically did not recognize what we're dealing with and was moving us in the wrong direction. So I feel good about where we are, but we need to keep moving. And we're going to have to move an awful lot through the Senate as well. As Jim mentioned, I serve as chair now of Homeland Security and Government Affairs of that Senate committee. And it's actually got two parts of it. It's the Homeland Security Department, and then the Government Affairs part means we're the top oversight committee for the U.S. Senate. And I've actually used that perch to really dive in and get facts related to how climate change is going to impact taxpayers. I think it's important for folks to realize how this impacts everybody's individual pocketbook. And we know it is extreme because of weather events, for example, and I oversee FEMA as part of the Homeland Security, is that we're going to have more storms, and the severity of those storms will also increase. And that means a lot of cost to taxpayers. In fact, we did a hearing in Michigan, a field hearing on that, and just looked in terms of Michigan. If you look at flooding events as a result of these changing weather patterns, it's estimated that we could be spending as much as $6 billion every year just in our own state dealing with floods between now and 2090 as the climate change. And we see that in the lakes and the lake levels, certainly the high lake levels we saw last season, which is related to this. That's why I authored and passed the STORM Act that now authorizes money available to local communities to deal with these extreme weather events. So when they hit, that they're better prepared. We all know that it's a whole lot smarter and a whole lot better to invest in infrastructure before the storm hits to deal with resiliency. That if you have resilient infrastructure, it ends up saving money. In fact, from our federal mitigation grants, it's estimated that for every dollar we invest today, it saves us $6 in the future. So we need to provide those resources up front and at a cost that local communities can afford. The STORM Act is actually a revolving fund, little or no interest, or very, very low interest that communities can tap into. And then it's perpetuating. As communities pay those loans back, it can be used for other municipalities going forward. So we look forward, we've got the authorization, we look forward to getting funding in the upcoming bills and the infrastructure bill. Certainly this is a clear part of infrastructure. I'm very excited to work with the Biden administration on a number of aspects with the infrastructure bill. And one area that I'm particularly focused on, and all of you can speak incredibly eloquently about this, we know that one of the best ways to reduce carbon emissions and reduce energy use is making our buildings more energy efficient. It's one of the best bangs for your dollar. It is the type of investment we need to be making as a country to making those buildings. And like most of the ways that we deal with climate change, it's also really good for jobs. Puts a lot of people to work, retrofitting businesses in the skilled trade. Those are all really good paying jobs. And we know, though, that although we want to make things more resilient and mitigate, we really got to stop the carbon production from occurring at the levels that it's occurring right now. Retrofitting buildings, to me, is and making incentives for that to occur is one of the best investments we can make as taxpayers while creating jobs as we move to other energy sources. I've also been very active in the electrification of vehicles, which is critically important to move away from the internal combustion engine. Now, clearly, we have to make sure the source of that electricity is generated by renewable sources and continue to push for solar and wind and biomass and other ways that we can generate it. But I'm encouraged by the proposal and support the proposal by the president to make sure that we're building charging stations, having that infrastructure so that as we move to electrified fleet, we're building the national infrastructure to support it. One particular area that I'm engaged in related to that is through the Postal Service. That's in addition to Homeland Security, I also oversee the U.S. Postal Service, and we've got a host of challenges with the Postal Service right now, as you know, and been working on that. But one thing we do know is that if you look at the vehicle fleet, the federal vehicle fleet, 1/3 of all the vehicles are postal vehicles. And those postal vehicles right now are very old. A lot of them are really quite dangerous for our letter carriers to be driving and for the public at large. We need to replace them. And when we replace them, they should be electric. We'll be able to electrify, which will be a major infrastructure investment into electrification. I plan to be introducing legislation shortly to do that. There was a contract that was set up and put out by the previous administration that is not aggressive when it comes to electrifying postal vehicles, but one that needs to be changed, and we're going to be leaning in pretty heavily. It also means we have to continue to advance the technology, and I've supported and passed in the past and hope to continue to support the Department of Energy's Vehicle Innovation Office, which is working really with some of the smaller companies, our auto suppliers, in innovation for alternative ways to propel vehicles, whether it's electric or other forms. We're going to need to continue to move forward in that area. So I'm going to stop there because I know folks had some questions. I don't want to do a Senate filibuster here, so I'm going to stop my Senate filibuster and take any questions that you may have. But before I do that, let me just take an opportunity to thank all of you again for your advocacy and your passion. What you do makes a difference.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. I do have a few questions that I think I will bring forward first, and we'll see if we have any come in from the chat. Thanks so much for all of those comments. You touched on a lot of the things that I know we'd like to hear. It was nice to hear you speaking of efficiency. Of course, electric vehicles here in Michigan is so important. One of the things I'd just like to, as you speak about the funding stimulus that we're hearing about from the Biden administration, we know that so many of the climate impacts that we're seeing are being felt by communities of color and low-income communities. And I wonder if you can speak to ways that that if Congress can ensure that those funds will help create jobs that will help low and middle-income families.
Well, you're absolutely right, Jim. We have to make sure that those, particularly who have been impacted the most, have the resources that they need. And you're right, particularly when you're looking at weather events. This is something that I work with in my main focus related to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management folks that deal with these storms that are hitting us with increased severity. And what we know is when a natural disaster hits, it tends to disproportionately impact communities of color. And that's whether it's hurricanes, wildfires, whatever it may be. Clearly, the pandemic is another example of that, where we had, it was equivalent to probably a hurricane that swept all across our country was the pandemic. And once again, communities of color and other disadvantaged communities were hit disproportionately. I've actually introduced legislation. We're hoping to pass it to create a special unit within FEMA to understand that when a natural disaster hits, it will hit those communities. And those communities need to have more resources than would be applied anywhere else in understanding the unique aspects of that. So that is, which I think is critically important, but also when you're talking about rebuilding, many of the older areas or those areas, if I go back to what I mentioned in retrofitting buildings, making them more energy efficient, those buildings tend to also be in older areas of communities of color and others that would benefit the most from retrofitting those buildings. Making investments into that housing stock, into the buildings in those areas would be substantial investments. But as we do that, it's critically important that the men and women who are actually doing the work also come from those communities and have those good paying jobs that are actually rebuilding the community. So we don't want to position, I don't want to have a situation where we're providing resources and rebuilding and strengthening communities, but they're outsiders that are coming in to do the work and are getting paid to do it. It needs to be the residents within those communities that benefit from these investments. But I think that's really a win-win for us from both a job perspective and from climate change. And whenever I talk about climate change, I always talk about jobs. I say, it's really good for the environment, but did I tell you it's really great for jobs? Let me focus on that again. And I think that's how we are able to build the kind of broad consensus necessary for us to make these investments and build the kind of support throughout the country necessary to make this a reality.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I mentioned in my introduction, and I think I'll come back to it right now, your longstanding support for concern about Line 5, and I know so many people here in Michigan, that's become a real important issue and question for them. Obviously, we've been pleased to see the action of the governor in the last few months, and now we're kind of moving into a situation where the issue is moving into the courts. I guess I just want to see if you have any observations of where you think that issue will be going in the future.
Well, it's in as you said, it's in the courts now, and I believe when the company has moved it into federal courts, I believe it should be in state court. So we're going to continue to make a push to get that case where it really belongs, because when you look at who is responsible, or I should say who has authority over that land, it's the state of Michigan. Those bottom lands in the Straits of Mackinac are part of the state, and it should be in state court, and hopefully we'll be able to move that. But I certainly do applaud the governor's efforts, the attorney general, and all of your efforts for it. It's absolutely unacceptable that we have that pipeline still there, sitting just on the bottom of the lake bed as a ticking time bomb. And we just averted a disaster recently with that anchor strike that was not just a dent, as Enbridge said it was actually a gouge. And it's another example that, in my mind, you can't trust Enbridge when it comes to the safeguarding of that. We already know full well after the Kalamazoo disaster and Enbridge, the fact that we had that expensive pipeline break, that we've got to continue to demand accountability. I'm going to continue to do that. I was actually able to pass through Congress and get it signed into law. To also look at all pipelines in the Great Lakes Basin as a high consequence pipeline that are subjected to the strictest federal oversight. Before that, certain areas could be designated that. In the Straits of Mackinac, we're designated that, but we know Line 5 is not just a risk in the Straits of Mackinac, it's all along its entire line. We look at the Upper Peninsula and all the sensitive ecosystems that pipeline goes through. We want to make sure it's as safe as possible. So it needs to be, the whole basin in my mind has to be designated that. And I'm happy to say we were able to build consensus around the country in a bipartisan way. And the one of the encouraging things that I see is that more of my colleagues in Washington realize that the Great Lakes are not just an incredibly important resource for the Great Lakes region, but they're an incredibly important resource for the entire country. And that's how we're going to be able to protect it, as we bring everybody to understand that this is a resource that's irreplaceable, and we have to be ever vigilant. And that means that the pipeline as it sits right now in the Straits, it has to go.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's I appreciate that. I want to just ask a quick follow-up on that, because it's a different direction. But tribal nations have become increasingly leading voices around the Line 5 issue, and they're raising really tribal treaty rights. And this is an issue both between the federal government and the state of Michigan. I'm just wondering if you can briefly speak to how we are doing as a nation at honoring our tribal treaty responsibilities.
Well, it's an ongoing struggle, Jim. So, and I understand exactly where Indian country is coming from in our tribal communities. But it is a constant battle. I've fought alongside our tribal communities to make sure that their rights are respected by the federal government, and we need to continue to do that. I will say a little different tact is if you look at the rescue plan that just passed out of Congress, it provided substantial resources to communities across our country, and those resources can be used to upgrade infrastructure. But one thing that myself and Senator Stabenow and our caucus insisted on was that there was parity with tribal governments, and they also received substantial resources to make the investments that they need to strengthen their communities. So it's there now in the current Congress, and certainly President Biden has been focused on it. But we have got to keep true to our word.
Okay, great. I have one One last climate question, if I could, just turn back to that for a second. Seeing a few questions coming in the chat that people are asking about the carbon fee and dividend, or a tax on carbon, and what's your position on that?
Well, I think there's no question that you have to put a price on carbon if you're going to really drive economic behavior. It's good old-fashioned capitalism. If you price something, it does have an impact on demand and use. But I want to make sure, this goes back to the question that you mentioned, that you raised earlier with disadvantaged communities, communities of color, and others. We've got to make sure that a carbon tax does not negatively impact those who cannot afford it. And that's why the carbon tax and dividend program, I think, is a very important solution to the problem. And understand, I take the position that if that goes into effect, I know there are a number of different ways to look at how you use the money from the tax. I would strongly say all of that has to go back into the pockets of taxpayers. And we have to make sure that folks are compensated for the cost. And quite frankly, based on the measures that I support, lower income folks will actually make money. They actually get a greater dividend coming back than what it costs. To me, that's good social policy. Help those who need help. Make sure they're not harmed, because right now, if we do nothing, they will be harmed disproportionately by climate change. We want to make sure we take away that harm from them, but also make sure that they're not impacted in covering the cost of transitioning our economy and reducing carbon. So I support that. I support legislation, although there is an effort now as we look at legislation, it's always 2 by 2. It's a Noah's Ark approach, as we call it here in Congress. For every Democrat, you got to have a Republican to go with you. And unfortunately, we don't have Republicans that want to join. And it's not helpful just to have all Democrats, although we're going to keep pushing it. We've got to have Republican support. We've got to keep working towards that. There are some members in my caucus that are starting to open up a little bit, but we've got to get them to actually put their name on the dotted line and build that. But you know, the thing that I really appreciate about it, and I know I'm preaching to the choir with all of you here, but this is every economist, whether you're a liberal economist, a centrist, or a conservative economist, there's a pretty wide agreement that if you want to deal with climate change, you have to price it. The tax and dividend program is a very elegant way to do that. And it also allows us to act quicker than any other kind of plan, because as I started this conversation, time is not on our side. We have to act now. We have to act aggressively. And we can do it in a way that's actually really good for our economy, protects those who are vulnerable. We can do this. There are smart ways to do it. We just need the political will. Clearly, voters have spoken in this last election that they're willing to take a look at these approaches, but we need to continue to do our job of advocacy, not just among ourselves, but across the broader public.
Great. Well, just to that last point, because you mentioned it at the top and now you're closing with it again, the urgency of the moment. It does feel like to many of us that have been working on the climate issue for many years, that there is a moment here of opportunity. And I just wonder how that feels to you in Washington, D.C. Do you feel there's kind of a changing of the tide here?
Well, what has changed the tide in Washington. I'll just talk raw politics. We're in the majority now, the folks who believe that, but I will also say it's a very narrow majority. In the U.S. Senate, it's 50-50, which is really not a majority, although it is a majority when we see Kamala Harris come into the chamber, and we all love, I see Debbie joined us here. Debbie and I love seeing Kamala Harris because we served with her and think the world of her, and love to see her come in to break ties, but we'd really rather her continue to focus on being VP. And we have a couple more members that share our view on climate change so we can get this passed. But it is clearly a commitment of our caucus that this is a moment in time where we have to take action. We have to be bold, and we need to do it in a comprehensive way. So you're starting to see, although already in the rescue plan, you'll see more as we work on the infrastructure, as we work towards the electrification and other issues that we talked about. So this is something that I care deeply about, and we don't know how long the politics of the situation will last. And so we better take action when we know we're able to have an impact in the future for our country and for our planet.
That's great. Thank you so much, Senator Peters. Now, before we lose you, I would love to have an opportunity I'd like to invite you to introduce our next speaker, if you would, because this is kind of a special opportunity to have two of our U.S. senators in a Zoom room together.
Well, thank you, Jim. Well, thank you again, everybody. Thank you for having me in this chat. And I'm honored to introduce my colleague, Senator Stabenow, my senior senator, and somebody who has really been a mentor to me from day one. And Debbie, we always like to say we're the 1-2 punch for Michigan. We are a team. We share our values. But I will just say I've been able to see and witness firsthand Debbie's leadership. She is tenacious. And if she wants to get something done, I will guarantee you it'll get done. It may not get done in the next hour, but in the next 2 hours, it's going to be done. She knows how to just grab an issue and run with it. So it's a privilege and an honor to serve with Senator Stabenow. She, again, is an outstanding senator for the state of Michigan. So thank you, Debbie. It's good to see you. I'm going to see you on the Senate floor in just a few minutes because I know they're calling votes here. But
I know they are going to be calling votes. Gary, always wonderful to be with you virtually in person. And I wish we could be with everybody in person, but at least through Zoom technology, we can at least connect. So it's great.
It is. Yeah. Now I'll leave Debbie to take all your hard questions. Thanks for giving me the easy ones. Take care,
yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Well, thanks. And thanks, Jim, and to everybody at the Michigan Climate Action Network and Groundwork. Really love what you're doing. So important. And I was listening, came on and talking about the existential threat of climate change. In fact, for me, I refer to it as the climate crisis over and over again, because that's exactly what it is. And if we think the COVID pandemic was bad, just wait. That's what I tell people, that what's happening here and what's going to continue to happen. And so I so appreciate your commitment, and we're way past time to act, that is for sure. And in my role now, as a member of the Senate leadership and in the 4 committees that I sit on, I literally am working through the lens of the climate crisis on everything from protecting the Great Lakes to jobs to focusing on agriculture and forestry and what we can do in that space on carbon sequestration. The co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force in the Senate on the Environment and Public Works Committee and so on. So I'd see everything now through that lens. And you know, a couple of years ago, actually 2019, I released a report that I'm sure many of you saw, trying to just talk to people in Michigan about the ways that the climate crisis was affecting us that people don't necessarily connect, right? The Great Lakes warming faster than the oceans, which is horrifying. The highs and lows in the water levels, the erosion, the damage that's going on, the extreme weather events, the local infrastructure that has been ruined, the warming of the water and what we're seeing with native fish. I mean, the Lake Superior is one of the 5th fastest warming lakes in the world, as you know, and we're going to lose cold water fishing. I mean, we're seeing both the economics of fishing and boating and tourism and so on all impacted. The algae blooms, longer algae seasons. I mean, all of the ticks and just all of it. We have to constantly, I think, communicate to folks how these changes all come back to what is happening around climate change. At the same time, these are great moments of opportunity for us, as we know. And certainly in terms of jobs, clean energy, manufacturing, and jobs. And that obviously has been something that I've been very focused on, as has Gary. I mean, I tell people all the time, we make things and grow things in Michigan, and you're not going to have an economy unless you make things and grow things. And we lead in innovation in so many areas. And now this is really about leading in for a cleaner, more energy efficient future. And we see folks all around Michigan doing that right now. The great news for us is that we also have a president of the United States who understands this to his core. I love seeing him. If you saw him driving the F-150 all electric, that was so terrific. Last week, he said it was the most fun he'd had in his presidency. But the most important thing about that is it says electric vehicles are real, are serious. You know, when we see our companies leaning in, not on small vehicles on the side, but on their profit centers, this is real, and multi-billions of dollars being invested. And so it's incredibly important the federal government be stepping up as a partner here on this as well. So let me just go through just briefly because I'm involved in a lot of different pieces on this, but I'm now back chairing the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee. And my number one goal has been to focus on the climate crisis. And we have reported out the only bipartisan climate bill in the United States Senate to the floor of the Senate. It was the very first bill we passed out of committee this year. It's called the Growing Climate Solutions Act, and it's to address ways for farmers and ranchers and foresters to be involved in leading on the climate crisis through nature-based solutions, which we should not discard. I mean, these are serious opportunities. Agriculture is about 10% of what we find in terms of greenhouse gas pollution, but at the same time can do more than that as part of the solution. So the Farm Journal Foundation just did a big report showing that ag can be a net carbon sink by incentivizing farmers and to capture carbon in soil and trees, and not counting what needs to happen on methane and nitrogen oxide and so on, which of course are even more dangerous. And so this is something I'm very, very focused on, and their report really focus on the things that we're doing in the Senate Agriculture Committee. So we've got this bill that sets up a structure, a producer-led advisory committee to basically work with farmers, develop the expertise for them, and to help folks have the knowledge and expertise, certified experts who work with them on how to more aggressively be able to basically sequester carbon, as well as do other things that relate to eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a bill that literally now has 50 co-sponsors in a place of 100 people, and just about half are Republicans. And so what we are finding is that in the agriculture space, and this is really true in Michigan, folks now say to me, look, I know that the climate crisis is real. It's, you know, I see it. I'm a cherry grower. I see what happens when it warms up and freezes and then kills all the buds on the trees. I see what's happening when I can't plant, or, you know, water, droughts and so on. But what do I do about it? What should I do? What can I do to be a part of the solution? And so this bill is very much about creating the support for them to be a part of the solution. And I'll tell you, I've been working on this piece of it for about 10 years. And 10 years ago, it was not leadership coming from the agriculture community at all to embrace this, even 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. But right now, we have over 100 different organizations endorsing this bill. Strong support in Michigan from, of course, Michigan State University and their work, but groups like Michigan Milk and Michigan Agribusiness, and then all of our environmental groups, the Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, and so on. But it's around rallying to support the right things to be done in terms of climate smart agriculture and dealing with voluntary carbon markets and supporting farmers, basically to do the right thing. Some farmers will want to do carbon credits in a voluntary carbon market. Some won't, but we know right now that scaling up climate smart agriculture and building on what I did in the 2018 Farm Bill around things, simple things like cover crops and bumper strips and a whole range of things that keep the soil, in place, and use less pesticides and have less runoff in the water and so on. But we know that scaling up climate smart agriculture can actually reduce emissions equal to taking 70 million cars off the road. Now, as somebody who comes from a car state, I'm not suggesting we want 70 million cars not being on the road. We want them to be electric or other clean energy. But the point is, this is not nothing. I mean, this is really important. So I'm working with the Biden administration and the jobs bill to really do a major investment in climate smart conservation in the jobs plan and so on. And, obviously this all relates to protecting our water and the Great Lakes as well. The other piece I would just say on ag is that we did a forestry hearing last week that was broadly supported, again, to look at how we can do more by planting trees. Again, sounds simple, but if you want to help the climate, as you know, plant a tree. And so forests are already offsetting the emissions of about 12 billion vehicles, and we can do a lot more. And there's a whole range of things, from not cutting down our old growth forests, to having the right kind of support for planting more trees and using wood lumber. We have a provision that I put in the last farm bill called the Timber Innovation Act, and it's about using wood instead of steel and cement and so on in materials. And we have huge potential in mass timber. Michigan State University has the largest multi-story building that's been constructed of all wood in Michigan, but we're now seeing major construction projects using wood. So there's a lot of pieces of this, again, that all add up. I've got two bills with Republican colleagues. One is a rural forestry bill to support small farm or forestry owners that want to come together, working with the Land Conservancy, Nature Conservancy, working with other groups to be able to do more around forestry management and planting more trees and so on. And then I have another bill with Senator Rob Portman called Replant Act, which is about planting trees, millions and millions of trees on our public lands where we've seen so much destruction because of wildfires. So forestry, agriculture is a part of the solution. I should also mention that environmental justice for me is in every piece of this. In the Agriculture Committee, we have an advisory committee that is going to oversee the Growing Climate Solutions program, and we made sure that farmers of color have seats on the advisory committee. When we're talking about research, we made sure that the historically black colleges and universities and the 1890s land grants have seats at the table as part of all of this. And I'm working on legislation that is going to increase urban tree canopy and create jobs for at-risk communities, like Detroit and Flint and Saginaw and communities across Michigan and nationwide, and deal as well with a number of the environmental justice issues. And so this is very much part of what I'm doing. I'm not sure if I'm taking too long here, Jim. I will be brief here. It just, I feel like there's a lot of things I'm working on. So let me just say, Environment and Public Works Committee, which I also sit on. We are tomorrow reporting out a surface transportation bill that's sort of in the middle of all of this negotiating we're doing, but it will have a climate title for the first time. And the piece that I've weighed in on significantly is around electric charging stations and so on. It's in President Biden's proposal. We will have substantial investment as well as a number of other things. And then tomorrow also, I'm on the Finance Committee. I'm second in seniority. We're doing a major clean energy markup on a whole range of things tomorrow. Again, much of those I'm involved in leading. We are developing a very robust consumer rebate for folks that purchase electric vehicles. It will be more than what we have done before. and not only incentivize for electric vehicles, but we'll add a bonus if it's assembled in the United States and a bonus if it is made with union labor. And so we are revamping and revigorating what we are doing. We know right now China is spending at least $100 billion on electric vehicle development alone, and not counting everything else they're doing on batteries, and the fact that we are woefully inadequate in our supply chains in the United States. We see it with semiconductors right now, and what has happened because the major suppliers in Taiwan and is not making what we need for the auto industry anymore. So what we're doing in the Finance Committee is focusing on the electric vehicle purchases. Only about 2% of the purchases right now are electric vehicles. In order for the price to really come down in the marketplace, we need to get that up to 10%. So that's a piece of it. We need the federal government purchasing more vehicles. We need, there's a clean energy manufacturing tax credit that I'm authoring that will give a 30% tax credit for retooling plants for clean energy, wind, solar, electric vehicles, other clean energy technology. And we've got a series basically of tax credits that we're doing in that space that is all leading up to how do we incentivize as much as possible what we're doing right here. So I'm going to stop. And so Jim, I'm happy to take questions, but I'm very much engaged in a number of ways in what we're doing right now for the climate crisis.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Stabenow. I will say just at the top, it's so heartening as somebody who helped start this Climate Action Network to hear both of our senators go on, actually going on a little longer, you're feeling about climate. I appreciate that, and we'll let you go because that is great. We'd love to hear more. And I do have a few questions because you also brought up something which we know it's passionate for you, which is agriculture, which we know is so important in climate. We tend to focus an awful lot on generation and efficiency, which are also incredibly important in transportation. But the agriculture and forestry work is so important as well. And as you said, the opportunities for natural solutions are there. I wonder, so much of our agriculture is at such large scale. I wonder if you can speak to some of the smaller scale solutions around regenerative agriculture that's actually beginning to sequester carbon in the soil. As one of those solutions, and what we can do to incentivize that.
That's absolutely one of the solutions. Regenerative agriculture is part of what we're talking about, actually in incentivizing. When I say climate smart agriculture conservation, I mean, that's very much regenerative agriculture. And we're doing a number of things to incentivize farmers, to partner with them, to be able to make transitions in that area. And so the efforts I'm working on with the Biden administration to really scale up resources relates to, incentivizing how farmers are using their land, the kinds of practices that regenerative agriculture or no-till or a whole range of ways in which we know this really is the future, and we need to be incentivizing it in our conservation programs. Our conservation programs in the agriculture space are voluntary, but what is done is it's through incentives. So we'll pay, you pay half, the federal government pays half, or we'll do, some other kind of match or some other kind of support. And so regenerative agriculture is very much, the Growing Climate Solutions bill is very much about that.
That's great. Great to hear. I'm not surprised. I want to go back. You mentioned this near the top of your comments about electric vehicles and the fact that President Biden was in Michigan just last week, I think it was.
Yes.
So, we've been building cars in Michigan for several generations, but they've all been gasoline powered. I wonder if you can speak to how Michigan can continue to be a leader as we transition to electric vehicles. Will these jobs stay in Michigan?
Well, we absolutely want those jobs, and we want the jobs in Michigan, and we want good union-paying jobs, union jobs in Michigan that are good-paying jobs. And I think a couple of things I would say, because there's a couple of pieces of it. First of all, I know that our companies, I mean, Ford, GM, I keep saying Chrysler, it's actually Stellantis, they are all leaning in. Tens of billions of dollars. And, GM has said by 2035, they will only be making electric vehicles. They've got 30 new electric models coming out in the next 5 years. And Ford, what they are doing, leaning in tens of billions of dollars, electrifying their top selling product. That's how I know they're serious. And it's awesome. And so one of the things that we know is that they are serious on this, which means we have to be serious on partnering with them, because they're making a bet that the federal government will step up on charging stations, will step up on consumer rebates to incentivize people to purchase electric vehicles until there's enough volume in the marketplace, that the price comes down naturally. We know that they are counting on tax incentives. Every other country is doing something to incentivize clean energy. And so they're counting on us doing our part while they are putting in tens of billions of dollars and retooling as well. So yes, Michigan has been a leader. We have been a leader for a long time, over 100 years. There's no reason that we can't continue to be the leader. We have more clean energy patents in Michigan than almost any other place in the country right now. And that's why the very first satellite patent office was put in Detroit, outside of DC. The very first place they picked was Detroit. And I made sure we named it the Elijah McCoy Patent Office. And so, I feel confident we can do that. But let me just give you one quick story about why tax incentives or tax policy is so important. 1914, there was an article in the New York Times about how Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were creating this vehicle, and they wanted it to be battery operated. And they were working really hard to do that, but they were having trouble finding a battery with long enough range. Sound familiar? So this is 1914. 1916, the Congress made the first huge tax breaks for oil and gas. It was a no interest loan, huge, embedded in the tax code. So no support for batteries at the time. The federal government, and every time my oil and gas colleagues say, we don't want to do wind and solar, and we don't want to do electric vehicles, it's picking winners and losers. And my response back is, no, you picked a winner over 100 years ago, and they won for 100 years. So we're just trying to level the playing field. Can you imagine if in 1916 there had been a major incentive for battery technology, where we'd be today? So tax policy matters. And so while on the one hand, on the Finance Committee, I'm fighting all of that in terms of rolling back and the oil and gas subsidies and so on. What we're trying to do now is level the playing field for 1,000 reasons. I mean, starting with what we need to do in terms of the climate crisis, but also because these are great vehicles. These are great vehicles and we should be doing everything possible, but tax policy matters. So as a member of the Finance Committee, I'm looking through all of those things. Even in the 2017 tax bill that the Republicans passed that gave huge corporate breaks and tax cuts for billionaires. In the middle of that, they even did another tax break for foreign oil efforts. And I tried specifically, I offered an amendment to take that out. And of course, they wouldn't. But, these tax incentives for oil and gas have gone on, for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I have one last question that I'd like to focus, and it kind of moves us back to the politics of the moment. This conversation of the American Jobs Plan and the stimulus. Can you just give us a little insight into how you think that may actually shape out here in the next, are we going to see these these large numbers that we're hearing, and how's that going to happen?
Well, that's the big question right now that we're sorting through. I mean, we have the narrowest of majorities, and we don't have a philosophical majority on everything. We mostly do, but not completely. And so we basically, are moving several things at the same time right now, looking for how it's going to come together. We reported out of the Environment and Public Works Committee a bipartisan water infrastructure bill. It's a great bill. And one of the things that was really important to me is that would authorize the complete replacing of all lead pipes in the United States. And they can start in Flint and Detroit and across Michigan. And that's great policy. The surface transportation bill we will pass tomorrow in EPW will be bipartisan, and it will have a lot of good policies. The problem is we can't get our Republican colleagues to agree to pay for it. So they're willing to put the policy out there. But the question is, how are we going to pay for it? And is it going to be robust enough for the moment? And so we're moving to try to see how far we can get on a bipartisan basis. But in the end, it's going to take 50 Democrats that have to vote for where we need to go on climate, because they won't go there. The hearing tomorrow in the Finance Committee on clean energy incentives will not be bipartisan. It will be completely party line vote. They're going to attack electric vehicles over and over again. They're going to attack wind and solar. They're going to go back to their old arguments about how this is picking winners and losers and so on and so on. So in the end, this has got to happen with the slimmest of slim majorities in the United States Senate. And that's what we're working to get, is to be able to do that, because we have to do it. And we're looking at trying to show colleagues that, want to be bipartisan. We all want to be bipartisan. I mean, every day I'm working with Republican colleagues. That's not the point. The point is, when it comes to the big things that have to happen at this moment, this is an opportunity at this moment that I don't think we're going to get back. I mean, in the sense that we need to act now. And in the end, we know that we will not get bipartisan support to step and be bold in this moment. So we have to do it. And I support whatever means. I support changing whatever rule is necessary. I support, because in the end, it's about getting results. And so I'm going to support whatever strategy will get us there.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. You can find more episodes of the Speaking of Resilience podcast at our website, groundworkcenter.org/podcast, miclimateaction.org/podcast, or on all major podcast platforms. If you appreciate this content and want more of it, stay up to date by subscribing to the podcast wherever you listen in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps other listeners find the Speaking of Resilient podcast. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Groundwork Center and at MI Climate Action. Speaking of Resilience is created by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities and the Michigan Climate Action Network. This episode was produced by Taylor Kramer of Cold Shower Media in collaboration with Nick Loud of the Boardman Review.